was face to face with the reality that I could not blame God for the state where I found myself. There was no reason to pray about God intervening. He already had intervened. But I wasn't embracing what he'd done to keep me from ever getting here in the first place. Many years ago, I found myself in nothing but a state of constant hurry. I was not driving fast. I was not walking fast. I was not rude and thus refused to make time for anybody. I was overloaded in my mind. I was forever in a state of transit, moving from one appointment to the next and never fully present anywhere. The pace of my mind was on rocket fuel. And to be honest, as I reflected on it, it occurred to me that most of my life had been lived in this fast lane of mental rush hour. I'd wake up and get on it. And that's what leaders do, right? They wake up at 4 a.m., work out, move the world all day long, go to bed, do it again tomorrow. In fact, that's the model you see today from all the celebrity leadership icons. They're all about getting on the grind and struggle and maximizing every ounce of every second of life. Now, I found myself plowing daily with the grind in Jesus' name. But my inner life did not feel like anything I saw when I read how Jesus moved throughout his day. This type of life in Christ I was living didn't seem to jive with the life I saw Christ living. Now, let me ask you this. When you read the New Testament, let me ask you this. When you read the Ten Commandments and you see you shall not murder, do you see that as a suggestion? No, you see it as a commandment. You'd never dream of treating you shall not commit adultery as a suggestion for a healthy marriage. Don't you find it ironic that we treat honor the Sabbath and keep it holy as a suggestion and not so much a commandment? Look at his words. Remember to observe the Sabbath by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. It's in Exodus 20. Starting in verse 8. So look at that first sentence. There's 3 steps present, 3 verbs that jumped out to me years ago. Remember, observe, and keep. The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people, and not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath, is what Jesus said in Mark chapter 2, verse 27. God gave me Sabbath. It was a gift, but only if I open it and put it to work. God commanded me that 1 day a week I am to lay it down. All of it. He gave me Sabbath to restore me, but it doesn't work if I rebel. Rebellion has never led to life. Rebellion only leads to death, in every form. When I obey the Sabbath, I remember that he is my provider. Sabbath reminds me that my revenue stream comes from heaven, not from an employer. When I obey Sabbath, I observe that he is in complete control of everything around me. He is a God of order, and by laying it down, I accept his order for life, and I observe the rhythms that restore life. When I obey Sabbath, I keep watch over what matters most: time with people, rest, recovery, and even fun. Yes, fun. Play, eat, disengage. And I can do all of those things when I am obedient to Sabbath. That season of life where I found myself mentally thin and depleted has happened again and again, many times over. It is not something I'm proud of. But when it happens, the first tool I reach for is Sabbath. Have I abandoned Sabbath? If I have, it's the first tool I use when life is in overload. For those of you that read the Man Minute, I did something a little different, and I talked about how I was going to offer a little more today and how God had used a mule deer hunt years ago to teach me about a principle. So I'm just going to tell you the story. And there's 2 parts to it. the first time I ever got to hunt out west was like 10 trips. I mean, I had never been to Disneyland until I had kids. So the first time I got to go out west was probably the equivalent of 10 trips to Disneyland all in one. I mean, every article I had read, every old TV show I had watched back on the Outdoor Channel when, the internet wasn't even a thing. I mean, just hunting out west was just this Hemingway feeling, man. So I had a connection to a family that owned thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of ranch land in Central Oregon. So I go out there, and it was so different from the South because, growing up hunting in the South, I mean, we have ridges and hollers, depending on where you're from. And there's all kinds of variations to you can listen, you can hear a road, you can see lights in the distance. I mean, there's ways to navigate. Man, when you get out there in 30,000 acres of private property, and there's basically only one tree, they're all some type of, spruce or conifer or something. And it just kind of all looked the same to me. It was the high desert, which means instead of ridges and mountains that go up, the canyons went down. So you looked out. So imagine standing out over what looks like, just the mesa, just scrub brush territory, much like Oklahoma or North Texas, just scrub brush territory. But all these big, deep valleys went down. And so you had to go down into these things and then come back up. And every time I would come back up, you'd be a little turned around from like, well, so you really had to work off of north, south, east, and west. And if it was cloudy, man, you had to have a compass. And it wasn't getting lost. It was just, man, you're on foot. So you're going to walk several miles a day, kind of in the wrong direction or kind of, somewhat angled off, and it just causes you a lot of time, energy, and effort. And so the guy that owned the land I was hunting with, he said, look, I'm going to point you in this direction, and I'm going to meet you in about 3 or 4 miles because you're going to come to a river bottom. And I'm like, okay. Yeah, I sure hope. I mean, there was, I don't know. Going back on it, I was a lot younger. I probably would have said, you know what, I'm going to stick with you, big boy, because I might die out here. I mean, it was pretty vast. I'm not going to lie. So the first few canyons I encountered, when I'd glass them and I wouldn't see a mule deer, and I'd come back out. I'm actually looking at 2 sheds right now in my office that I found that day that were just trophies, man. I mean, we never find sheds in the South hardly, and I found all kinds of sheds that day. It became a shed hunt, and I was having the time of my life. And so I'm coming back down. I go into these canyons and I come back out, and every time I do, I'm kind of further off, just in vector. And I happened to look, and out on the horizon, for whatever reason, was this barren, tall tree, probably a cottonwood, if my history tells me anything, just from what I've learned. It was different from all the other scrub brush trees. It was probably 10 feet taller than anything else, but it was just tall enough that on the horizon I could line up with it. And so what I did is every time I would come up out of a canyon or a coulee, I would look for that tree, and I would start navigating back toward that tree. And that tree kept me in line with that riverbed where I was supposed to meet him. And on the plane back, I started thinking about a fixed point. A fixed point is something that when you get off the grid, or as your Maps app says, proceed to the route, you're off the grid, you're out of kilter here. A fixed point brings you back. It's why we work off the sun. And so a fixed point matters. And I believe that's what Sabbath is. Sabbath is a fixed point. That every time your life gets derailed, you can line up with Sabbath. And it's the first thing to reach for to bring you back online. The second part I mentioned that I've had to learn in soul keeping is, and this was I don't have the vocabulary to tell you how monumental this study was to my Christian journey, probably 15, 20 years ago when I began to discover what the soul is. I think the soul is the most misunderstood. I would say the most, maybe that's overreach, but I would say it has got to be in the top 5 of the most misunderstood and undervalued parts of the Christian life. The soul is your mind, your heart, your will, and your emotions. It's the deepest part of you. And God gave you dominion over your soul. Your soul is not the eternal part of you. If you read 1 Thessalonians 5, it says, Paul says, I pray the God of peace will sanctify you in body, soul, and spirit. We are triune beings, body, soul, spirit. Our body is our body. Our spirit is the eternal part of us. That's what goes to heaven. And your soul is the inner life. It's your mind, your heart, your will, your emotions. Your soul can be depressed. It can be oppressed. It can be happy. It can be sad. It's your attitude. It's how you see life. It's all of the emotional side of you. And God gave you dominion over managing those emotions. We are emotional people. I can't stand it when people say you're being emotional. Well, we're all emotional. We just show it differently. But you have been given dominion over your soul. And so what I've learned about my soul is I actually monitor my soul a lot. I'll keep watch over my pace. And I could probably talk for an hour of all the different tools I use because to keep me from anxiety and overload and living in a constant sense of a constant sense of fog, or a constant sense of I'm not doing enough and I got to get it done, and not being present. That's the biggest thing. Man, when I get out of whack, I am not present in the moment, and it drives me crazy. And I can't enjoy life. I can't enjoy conversations because I got to be somewhere else, and I fight that. And so what I've had to learn is that God gave me dominion over the fact that He is Lord of my life, and He is able to draw me back. And so the bottom line is those fixed points, Sabbath is the first thing I do. It is the tree I line up with. And I want to tell you, probably 2 or 3 years ago, I really realized I had slipped on Sabbath a little more. And I just made a commitment to, you know what? I'm just not doing that. I am going to honor Sabbath because it is a commandment. And man, when I started doing that and did it for real and haven't backed off of that, the life it gave me, it was instant. So I would encourage you, friend, line up with a fixed point of Sabbath, and you're going to be better for it. And you know what? So is everybody else around you. Being a missionary doesn't always mean going to a foreign country. You do the best work and the most consistent work right where you live, in the circle of influence that God's already given you. Plow the field you're already standing in, so to speak. Would you be willing to share the Man Minute? Maybe not with the whole world, but just think through a list of buddies or somebody that needs a text sent to them with a link. You might be surprised at just how far sowing that seed could go for an eternal harvest.